In the small town of Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and vast meadows, there lived a young man named Ethan. He was a kind-hearted and hard-working young man, known throughout the village for his dedication to his family and the unwavering love he held for his parents. Ethan lived with his father, George, and his mother, Margaret, in a modest cottage on the edge of town. They weren't wealthy, but they had enough to get by, and most importantly, they had each other. A life of simplicity. The family's life was simple. George worked as a carpenter, and Margaret tended to the garden, growing vegetables and herbs to sell at the local market. Ethan had grown up learning the value of hard work from his father, who spent long hours in his workshop crafting beautiful wooden furniture for the townspeople. Ethan would often help his father with his carpentry, sanding wood, hammering nails, and carrying finished pieces to the customers' homes. Despite their humble lifestyle, Ethan's parents always encouraged him to dream big. They often told him stories of great cities and distant lands, places filled with opportunities. But Ethan, though he listened with interest, never felt the urge to leave his family behind. His world was here, in Willowbrook, with the two people who meant the most to him. One evening, after a long day in the workshop, George sat at the dinner table, his hands calloused and tired from years of carpentry. "Ethan," he said, "you've been a great help to me. But you're a young man now, and I want you to think about your future. There's a whole world out there beyond this town." Margaret nodded in agreement, her gentle eyes fixed on her son. "We want the best for you, Ethan. You don't have to stay here forever. You can chase your dreams." Ethan smiled but shook his head. "I'm happy here, Mom. Dad, I love working with you. I don't need anything else." His parents exchanged a glance, both proud and concerned. They understood Ethan's attachment to home, but they also wanted him to experience life beyond Willowbrook. However, they didn't push him. They knew that Ethan had to make his own decisions when the time was right. A quiet life shaken. One autumn evening, as the family sat around the fireplace, sipping tea and listening to the wind rustling through the trees, there was a knock at the door. It was unusual to have visitors at this hour, especially in such a quiet town. Ethan stood up to answer, and when he opened the door, he found a man dressed in a fine suit, clearly a traveler from a wealthier place. "Good evening," the man said with a smile. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I'm passing through town and heard about your father's excellent carpentry. I was wondering if I might commission him for a job." George stood up and came to the door, greeting the man with a nod. "What kind of work do you need?" The man explained that he was from the city, a place Ethan had only heard about in stories. He owned a large estate and wanted a custom-built bookshelf for his private library, something ornate and grand. He had heard from other travelers that George was the best carpenter in the region. George agreed to the commission, but the job would require time and precision, not to mention rare materials. It'll take me a while to complete, George said. And I'll need to find some special wood. The man nodded, understanding. No rush. I'll be staying at the inn for a few weeks. Please take your time. After the man left, the family discussed the project. It was an exciting opportunity, but it also meant long hours in the workshop. Ethan offered to help his father, as always, but George seemed hesitant. I'm getting older, Ethan, George admitted quietly after dinner. My hands don't work the way they used to. This might be one of the last big jobs I can take on. Ethan looked at his father, surprised. He had always seen his father as strong, capable, and tireless. But now, for the first time, he noticed the strain in his father's face, the stiffness in his movements. Don't worry, Dad, Ethan said softly. I'll help you finish this. We'll make it the best bookshelf anyone's ever seen. The work begins. The next morning, Ethan and George set to work. Ethan handled much of the heavy lifting, fetching the wood and preparing the materials. As they worked side by side, Ethan couldn't help but notice how much his father was slowing down. George's hands shook slightly as he held the tools, and he often had to take breaks to rest. Margaret, ever watchful, brought them food and water throughout the day, but Ethan could see the worry in her eyes. She too noticed that her husband was no longer the man he had once been. Over the next few weeks, Ethan took on more and more of the workload, crafting intricate details into the wood and shaping the shelves with care. George guided him, offering advice and encouragement, but it became clear that Ethan was doing most of the work. The young man's natural talent for carpentry shone through, and soon, he was crafting pieces that rivaled his father's best work. As the bookshelf neared completion, the traveler from the city returned to check on their progress. He was amazed by what he saw. "This is extraordinary," the man said, running his fingers over the smooth wood. "Young man, you have a true gift. Have you ever considered coming to the city to work? I know several wealthy families who would pay handsomely for your craftsmanship." Ethan hesitated. The idea of leaving Willowbrook, of leaving his parents, was unsettling. But the man's offer was generous, and he could see the pride in his father's eyes as the man praised his work. "You don't have to decide now," the traveler said, sensing Ethan's uncertainty. "But if you ever want to expand your horizons, you're always welcome in the city." A difficult decision. That night, after the traveler had left, Ethan sat outside under the stars, thinking about the man's offer. His heart was torn. On one hand, he loved his family and his life in Willowbrook. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the fact that his father was getting older, and soon, it would be up to him to provide for the family. Margaret joined him outside, sitting down beside him on the porch. "You're thinking about the offer, aren't you?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I love working with Dad, and I don't want to leave you both." But I also know that I can't stay here forever. Dad's not as strong as he used to be. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. Your father and I have always known this day would come, Ethan. We want you to follow your own path. If that means staying here, we'll support you. But if you want to see more of the world, don't be afraid to take that step. We'll always be here, no matter what. Ethan looked at his mother, her kind face illuminated by the moonlight. He knew that she was right, but the thought of leaving them was still painful. I just don't want to leave you both behind, he said quietly. Margaret smiled softly. You're not leaving us behind, Ethan. You'll always be our son, no matter where you go. A new beginning. After days of contemplation, Ethan made his decision. He would go to the city, but not permanently. He would work there for a few months, save up money, and then return to Willowbrook to continue helping his parents. It was a compromise that allowed him to explore new opportunities while still staying connected to his roots. When Ethan told his parents, George hugged him tightly. I'm proud of you, son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You've become a fine man, and I know you'll do great things. The day Ethan left for the city was bittersweet. His parents stood at the edge of town, waving goodbye as he walked down the road with his bag slung over his shoulder. Though it was hard to leave, Ethan knew that this was the right decision. His heart was full of hope and determination. The journey forward. In the city, Ethan quickly made a name for himself as a talented carpenter. His work was admired by many, and he received more commissions than he could have ever imagined. But despite his success, Ethan never forgot where he came from. Every few weeks, he would return to Willowbrook, bringing gifts for his parents and helping his father with small projects around the house. Over time, Ethan's visits became more frequent, and eventually, he decided to return to Willowbrook for good. The city had been an exciting chapter in his life, but his heart belonged with his family. Together, they continued to work, live, and love in the small town they called home. Ethan had learned that no matter where life took him, the bond he shared with his parents was unbreakable. And in that knowledge, he found peace and happiness, knowing that he could chase his dreams while still honoring the love and sacrifice of his family.